This is Football at 4.
Executives pointed out to me that Jalen Hurts did not look right last year. The Eagles could downplay whatever knee issues he was dealing with in season. Wasn't even really on the injury report in some cases, but they felt like he just wasn't moving the same. Couldn't do that dual threat ability that he's so good at with the offense. And then Nick Sirianni's attack with Philly last year was just not very good. I mean, they were in a situation where they kind of rolled the ball out, tried to do what they did the year before. Teams adjusted. Eagles didn't evolve, so Hurts was in a position where he just wasn't highlighted.
ESPN's Jeremy Fowler on why Jalen Hurts was not ranked among the top 10 quarterbacks in the NFL. Is it an egregious leave off the list, or does it sound about right? We're getting ready for Eagles training camp. July 23rd is when they report. Geoff Mosher, Football at 4, host of the Inside the Birds podcast, which you can get on all podcasting platforms, is here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. You know, Moshe, Hurts is a really interesting guy. He came out of nowhere to be an MVP candidate. He took a step back last year. I don't think any of us can debate that. But the whole point as to why, what did we see from Hurts? And to the point now, is he overlooked as one of the better players here, or is he back to like just middle of the pack, and that's where he is, and that's okay?
Well, there's a little bit of all of that, Mike. Good to talk to you today. I would say, so I remember last year, right? These top 10 lists can be very sort of annoying, deceiving, and meant for debate that only lasts a certain amount of time. If we go back to last year, I remember seeing Jalen Hurts like top 3 on people. It was almost like Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts. And then, you know, you forget that a year later you're going to be doing it all. You know, Lamar Jackson had fallen off, and now he was MVP again. And I kept looking at people's top 10 lists last year at this time, and I was laughing because you're not seeing Matthew Stafford on anybody's list because the Rams 2 years ago had a rough season. He was hurt. Everybody thought he was cooked and washed up and done. And, you know, Matthew Stafford, in my eyes, has never not been a top 10 quarterback in the league. I think when he's healthy and playing, he's great. But that's the way these top 10 lists always go. They're almost, what have you done last year instead of what have you done for the entirety of your career? So I don't put too much into wherever Jalen Hurts is or isn't on a top 10 list. He's clearly a quarterback who's got really good capabilities. I think he's someone, though, who if he's not in the right environment, if things aren't going well like they weren't last year, if you're in an offense that's predictable like last year's got, it's going to impact his play. If he has an injury, which we saw last year with his, I believe it was his knee, right, where he's not running the same way and he's not as dynamic, that's going to impact his play because, Mike, to me, he's one of those quarterbacks that hasn't yet reached a level, and he may not, where it doesn't matter what your environment is. It doesn't matter whether you got a little nagging injury here or there. That's like a rare elite company to me that maybe Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen could be in. I guess when healthy, Joe Burrow is pretty damn good every single, week to week to week. But that fraternity is pretty small there. Everybody else, I think, no matter how good they are, needs some help, needs some environment, needs some good coaching around them.
I guess the follow-up to that is, if he's not the guy he was the year they went to the Super Bowl, what does that mean for this team?
That's a great question. I think that depends on the 53-man roster around him. There are guys, like Joe Flacco's best year, was it the year he won the Super Bowl? Statistically, no, it was his best postseason. He was unbelievable that year when he was unbelievable that postseason when he led the Ravens to a Super Bowl. But I don't know if he finished with statistics that would have made you say he was the top 3 quarterback in the game at that point, right? But that was a great Ravens team and had a lot of good weapons, a lot of good veterans. And I think if there's a really good 53 by Howie Roseman and the front office, and no, I don't think Jalen Hurts has to be a top 3 quarterback to win a Super Bowl.
When you look back, he mentioned, the injuries. He's like, oh, the team can say what they want. He never appeared on the injury report. But what do you make of all that, like that knee and all this stuff, and he didn't run. He wasn't obviously as elusive, and he just constantly looked like something was up. But we never heard anything after the season was over. It wasn't like one of those things where it's like, oh, by the way, Jalen Hurts ended up getting his knee cleaned out, or is it, it almost seemed like it went away, and the team never addressed the fact that, was he dealing with injuries? Like, what do you make of that? That does seem a little odd now that we're getting ready for this training camp.
I will say, I think the team has always done a good job, but especially Jalen Hurts' camp, they do a good job of not putting stuff out there, so that if a reporter hears something that may have happened, an injury here or a procedure here and there, it's like there's no double confirm. There's nobody who can come out and say, yeah, this is happening. So, I definitely believe, I know he obviously had a knee injury last year. He talked about it. There were times he was not on the injury report, but anybody with eyes watched him run at times last year, and you could tell he was not as elusive, he was not as dynamic, and not as willing to run at times. And by the way, that just goes to show you how tough the dude is. I mean, he's been, whether it was the knee last year, I think it was the shoulder collarbone going in, the last month of the season, the year before when they went to the Super Bowl. He had the ankle thing the year before that. The guy is really, he plays through a lot of stuff, and he takes a lot of punishment, nature of the position, but also the nature of the way he plays the position. Doesn't miss a whole lot of games. But yeah, I definitely think he was hampered. Now, that gets into the question, Mike. If you're going to play that style of football where you're going to have the quarterback run a lot, push play where he's always underneath the pile, does he need to graduate and become less like that? And is that an ultimatum or a referendum, I should say, on the kind of quarterback he is? I don't think the story of Jalen Hurts is fully written. It shouldn't be at this stage of his career, and we'll see if he continues to develop as a thrower and can run on his terms. I don't think that should ever go away. But, you look at Lamar Jackson. They built a passing offense around him last year, but he still ran when he wanted to run. They still did use design runs at times. But it wasn't, per se, the backbone of the offense the way it was when Greg Roman was their offensive coordinator, because Todd Monken wanted to go out there and build more offensive weaponry around him. They draft Zay Flowers, right? They bring in Odell, and they try to give him some more weapons. And clearly, Jalen Hurts has enough weapons here to be a really good quarterback if he doesn't run as much. So we will see if the new offense and in a year of Jalen Hurts, more development, if he becomes a throwing quarterback who runs advantageously, or if it's still running the ball with him is still amazing. If it's still 1-2 reads, then go.
Right, and I guess, if he's not the RPO guy, one of the things that made him so dangerous the year before was, I felt anyway, see if you agree or disagree, I felt he always made the right decision. Like, if it was hand the ball off, he handed it off. It was to keep it and run himself, he kept it and run himself. It was to pull it and find somebody open, he made the right decision and found the right guy. That seemed a lot clunkier last year. Do you agree with that, or are you not on the same page with me?
No, it seemed clunkier. And, a lot of people say, well, that's because you lost Shane Steichen. And maybe there was something to that. I don't think the RPO is like the most complex thing. I mean, there are different ways to run it. And as we've sort of gone through the years here, the way it looked 5 or 6 years ago when it was simply just pull and throw a slant, now you're seeing a lot more run action off it. You are seeing the RPO game evolve a little bit. So it's not just how it looked 5 or 6 years ago, but it's still not a very complex play. And I do think that part of the clunkiness last year was teams expecting it because the Eagles were running it at among the highest rates in the NFL the 2 years going into last year. So obviously teams are going to adjust. They're going to practice against it, especially the teams in your division that get used to it. They get used to your tendencies, and that's where you need to either become less of an RPO team or freshen up the RPO plays that you are running.
Geoff Mosher, Football at 4 from the Inside the Birds podcast here on the Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. You take a look at, and somebody would say, like, look, you got Jalen Hurts, you've got A.J. Brown, Smith, Goddard, this offensive line. How is he a product of the weapons around him, or do they kind of elevate? You know what I'm saying? Like, because some people would say, like, hey, he's got all these weapons. Because 3 years ago, he was a pretty average player, right? I think we could all agree on that. And then he got A.J. Brown, and that kind of took him to this next level. So how did he make that jump? And is that because he is there's an elite player in there somewhere, or was he a byproduct of what the offense was and what's around him?
Yeah, that's why I brought up the chapter of Jalen Hurts is not written yet. I would hate to declare what he is right now and say that's what he's going to be for the rest of his career. But to your question, I only think there's a couple of quarterbacks in this league think Patrick Mahomes has shown, like, you can take away Tyreek Hill from him. You can take away some of his other weapons. You can leave him with an offense like last year that really was very, very modest by Kansas City Chiefs standards as far as, weaponry. And the guy still won the Super Bowl, right? I mean, yes, they had a great defense, but the bottom line is he won another Super Bowl because he's that level of quarterback. I don't think it's fair to put Jalen Hurts in that or near that category yet until we see him have to win games with less than that kind of firepower. However, as I keep saying, he's young. He's already surprised a lot of people with how far he came since year one, and I would never write the final chapter on him without giving it a couple of years to see how this thing goes. Now, if he has a really bad year coming up in 2024, Mike, if he does not play well, if he regresses, and then you sandwich that with how he ended last year, 2023, then maybe you start to get a vibe that he needs a lot of firepower, or when teams catch up to him and start game planning against him, he's not gifted enough to adjust. But again, we're talking about the quarterback. Wins are not a quarterback stat, right? I mean, he can play, to me, at just a good to very good level, and the Eagles could be really good if everybody around Jalen Hurts is also playing at a high level.
Yeah, I know the quarterback gets a lot of it, but, hey, you have Brown and Smith and Goddard and now Saquon Barkley. A lot of people are going to look to the quarterback if he struggles again, don't you think?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's no excuse unless the offensive line is really takes a huge step back, or unless you got major injuries. I mean, they do have some depth issues at wide receiver. So if A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith were to go down for a prolonged amount of time, Dallas Goedert has had some injuries. If you have two guys go down, well, then you could say, all right, well, that's an issue. But at the same time, in the context of our discussion, you will still look at the quarterback and say, hey, man, this is your 5, your 6. Like, you got to start, dealing with that and lifting up players when your starters go down. So that does tell people what kind of quarterback you are. If everybody goes down and you are not a good player, well, then that's a reflection of you as a quarterback as well.
Yeah, and I would say, looking at the list of 10 that they, the executives and whoever, they do this every year, the executives, scouts, talent evaluators, coaches. I don't have a guy on this list that I think Hurts definitively should be ahead of. Dak Prescott, Jared Goff, Aaron Rodgers, C.J. Stroud, Herbert, Stafford, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes. Like, I don't know if there's one guy there that I would have to vigorously argue about that Hurts. Now, I think what you said is right. Like, he was in this list entering last year based on what he did the year before. So right. Can he get back to that level? That remains to be seen. But I don't think he's definitively better than any of these 10 guys.
Like I said, after the just the no-brainer top, the guys who you watch on a week-to-week basis and say they win because they have this guy and this guy only, and there's only just a couple of quarterbacks I think that really fit that. After that, to me, it's like you put it in a blender because you have guys who can be really, really good, like Jared Goff you mentioned, like Dak Prescott, Jalen Hurts at times, very many times, can be really, really good, but all of those guys can have bad games too, and have had bad games, and that's why, Goff is a perfect example. I used Matthew Stafford, but I bet you like 2 years ago he was in nobody's top 10, right? So it just shows you, like, it's your environment, the coaching. That's most of the quarterbacks in this league. They need help. They need good coaching. They need a good environment. They need good playmakers around them. So it's not a knock when we discuss this on Jalen Hurts. There really may only be 2 or 3 guys who you think can just win by being on the field, and their name is their name.
All right, so they sign Saquon Barkley in the offseason, and the over-unders are out for him, all right? You ready for these ones? Mosh,
yeah.
All right, I was going to say, I didn't know you were still there. No, sorry.
Dramatic pause, my fault.
Dramatic pause. All right, so, I think these are interesting for Barkley because obviously he's the guy who moved, and everybody's kind of waiting to see what everybody thinks. All right, regular season rushing yards for Barkley, over under 1,050.5.
Oh, man, this is so tough if you don't know how many games he's going to play. But I'm going to assume he'll stay healthy. play most of the season. I'll put him over 1,050. I think I would do that.
Regular season.
I mean, with 17 games now, Mike, 1,050, you basically have to average, what, like 65 rushing yards a game? I haven't done the math, but it's not that hard.
Yeah. Oh, listen, 1,000 yards used to be the number. Now you see 1,000, you're right. You have to kind of recalibrate it with the extra game in there. If you don't get 1,000, are you really that good? I mean, even
Right.
DeAndre Swift had 1,000 yards last year.
That's right.
Regular season rushing touchdowns, over, under, 7.5.
Oh, wow. I'm thinking that we might not see as much tush push this year, so I'm going to go over on that.
Okay. No tush push. Goal line carries go to Barkley. More touchdowns from the running back than the quarterback. I think Hurts had, 9 rushing touchdowns last year, so keep that in mind if you're going to use those numbers for Hurts. All right. These are the interesting ones. Regular season receptions, Saquon Barkley, over, under, 40.5.
40.5. That's like not even 3 a game, right? I'll take the over on that.
Okay, so you think he'll be a bigger part of the pass offense than some of these other guys?
Yeah, that's basically 2.5 per game if my math serves me correct.
Well, I don't know that that's been easily achieved by these other backs in the past, and we've always kind of left scratching our head as to why the running back is not a bigger part of the pass game, right?
Well, that is a fair point. And to your point, DeAndre Swift had his fewest receptions of his career last year. But I'm big on, I think you are too. Just because it happened last year doesn't mean it's going to happen this year. I'm a big variance guy, and I think with this offense and Saquon's ability to catch the ball, that I actually think they're going to probably try to get the screen back, and it was terrible last year. So I will go again. If he plays 8 games because he gets hurt, then
right. These are all based on him getting through the season healthy, obviously.
Yeah. Which is its own betting odds. Like, does he play at least 15 or more games?
Right, exactly. Regular season receiving yards, over, under, what would you set it at?
So let's see. I'd probably set it at, I don't know. This is tough. Give me a second here. So I'm already saying he's going to average about 3 catches a game, right? So 3 catches, give him 25, 30. Put him at like 450.
You have 450, so you're taking the over. The over-under is 325.5.
Yeah, that's probably more fair.
Yeah.
I have a feeling he's going to have games where he catches like 6 or 7 balls and then games where he doesn't catch any.
Last one. Regular season receiving touchdowns, 2.5.
I'm going to go under on that.
By the way, Jalen Hurts had 15 rushing touchdowns last year, 13 in 2023, 10 in 2022. DeAndre Swift had 5 rushing touchdowns last year, and Miles Sanders had 11 in 2022. Miles Sanders, he really had a huge year for them.
We would talk about it on Inside the Birds all the time, that his running style had developed and grown as an Eagle, from a guy who was trying to make the big cut every time, the big run, and he became more of a grinder. And I would say 2 years ago, he was known as more of a grinder than even Saquon was. Because Saquon, Greg Cosell brought this up on our Giants preview a week or 2 ago, that the Giants have tried to use Saquon, especially 2 years ago when they made the playoffs, as a grinded out running back, fourth quarter carry kind of guy when you're up in a game, and they struggled with it. So he really doesn't have, despite his size and his tremendous abilities, he has not really carved out that role yet as a guy who you can just make your workhorse, and he's always going to get you the positive yards, fall forward, get you the yards, and drain that clock out.
Yeah, I know a lot of people, anticipate that Barkley, he's a tough guy to tackle. He's a big physical back, but, that's not been the way that he has kind of had success as his first. I'm just interested to see what he looks like behind an offensive line that's capable.
I'm sure he is too, Mike.
Well, that and
all of the organs in his body agree with you.
well, that and we know the Giants front office has thought the same thing. Is they have said, hey. What's he going to be like behind an offensive line like Detroit or Philadelphia if you watch the Hard Knocks, and now we see him in Philadelphia? What will he look like behind that offensive line? We're going to start to find out soon as the Eagles report in less than 10 days, and we'll have coverage here on Football at 4. And all the guys over at the Inside the Birds podcast, they're really breaking down this offseason and getting you ready for training camp. And, of course, we'll have more on Football at 4. All right, Moshe, thanks, buddy.
Have a great one, Mike.
All right, good breakdown there.